the limits of the Tractatus as a student of the CTMU are clear from the first proposition of the Tractatus that seeds the error. I'd like to share some thoughts about the Tractatus of Ludwig Wittgenstein. It's a work that is directly referenced in the CTMU, in the Cognitive Theoretic Model of the Universe of Christopher Langan.
Perhaps the meaning of this principle can be most concisely expressed through a generalization of the aphorism, whereof one cannot speak, one must be silent, whereof that which cannot be linguistically described, one cannot perceive or conceive. So for the observational and theoretical purposes of science and reality theory, that which is non-isomorphic to language is beyond consideration as a component of reality.
Language covers all perception and conception, and it's a generalization of the final aphorism of the Tractatus, whereof one cannot speak, one must be silent. This work is a critique of what can be said, so it's a critique of language, of propositions, what can be meaningfully described through propositions. On face value, some of the assertions of the Tractatus appear to be quite opposed to the CTMU because, for example, Ludwig Wittgenstein says that a tautology says nothing about reality because it's just a structure in the logical propositions, but the tautology follows from any proposition, so it is sort of the null information about the world. Ludwig Wittgenstein is very critical about tautologies, and the CTMU presents the reality theory as a supertautology.
Logic. Truth is defined by means of always true expressions called tautologies. A logical tautology possesses three distinctive properties. It is descriptively universal, it is closed under recursive self-composition, and it is internally and externally consistent on the syntactic and semantic levels of reference. Since logic is the theory of truth, the way to construct a fully verifiable theory is to start with logic and develop the theory by means of rules or principles under which truth is heritable. Because truth is synonymous with logical tautology, this means developing the theory by adjoining rules which themselves have a tautological structure, i.e., which are universal, closed, and consistent, and logically extracting the implications. A theory of reality constructed in this way is called a supertautology.
Theory that covers everything that defines reality and truth onto the universe, which is coupled with this supertautology. So Wittgenstein and Langan, they both agree that logic covers all the pictures of reality, either P or not P, for example.
Take the sentential tautology, X exclusive or not X, applied to perception. This means that when something is seen or observed, it is not seen in conjunction with its absence. If it were, then two contradictory perceptions would coincide, resulting in a splitting off of perceptual realities.
But Wittgenstein finds tautologies to be meaningless. Everything comes from the experience, and the experience comes from the fact that reality shows propositions. So the ability to describe the world through language is sort of this tautological structure that is grounded on the fact that the general form of a proposition is known, and the proposition says this is how things stand. So it's a description of a situation that is shown by reality. And so you have tautologies that provide a structure that allows you to describe in a meaningful way the world. It gives a logical framework onto which the world will appear. And so you have this logical framework which is meaningful, but that doesn't say anything about the world because the way that the world is known is through reality showing the world. And it shows it through the propositions that preserve the structure of reality. So there's a beautiful image where the propositions about the world are explained to reflect the world as the score of an opera reflects the music, as the vinyl, the engraving of music on a vinyl also represents the music. So there's a close link. We could think that propositions are very distinct from the world, but Wittgenstein says propositions show the world as it is. There's a translation, there's a direct link. And so Wittgenstein presents a system of what can be said about the world because the world shows itself and is captured through propositions that directly reflect reality. So there's no separation between reality and the propositions about reality, because reality shows itself as what is captured through propositions. So there's a similarity there, because in the CTMU, instances are coupled with syntax, so they directly reflect a linguistic syntax.
Information and syntax comprise infocognition, self-transducing information in the form of SC-SPL syntactic operators that cross-absorptively communicate by acquiring each other's informational states as cognitive syntactic content.
And in Wittgenstein, reality shows itself in facts, in propositions that directly reflect reality. So there's also this close link between the linguistic, the logical, the propositions, and reality. In the CTMU, there's also nothing behind the evolving linguistic syntax of reality. And so here we find, I think, a good introduction to that idea, especially because the CTMU preserves logical consistency, preserves at the display level this binary yes or no, this boundary between what is the case and what is not the case.
Map requires a closed form explanation on the grounds that distinguishability is impossible without it. Again, this comes down to the issue of syntactic stability. To state it in as simple a way as possible, reality must ultimately possess a stable, two-valued object-level distinction between that which it is and that which it is not, maintaining the necessary informational boundaries between objects, attributes, and events. There is a sense in which infocognitive monism well agrees with the thesis that bits are universal descriptors of reality, because the bit values 1 and 0 are analogous to the truth values of two-valued logic. The fact that perceptual reality is described by a two-valued logic implies that it can be described in terms of bits. However, while reality at large is defined by relevance to perceptual reality in the relativistic sense, it does not consist of perceptual reality alone.
And so, in that way, because of the link between reality and this logical framework of pictures of propositions, Wittgenstein is a good introduction to the CTMU because of the isomorphism between reality and language, as well as the fact that language has a logical structure. And this is also powerful because Wittgenstein explains how this structure relates to what we can say about the world. In logic, for example, the truth of the proposition is the same as the truth of the double negation of a proposition, but Wittgenstein provides the concept that allows to think of these negations as just symbols that don't belong to the picture of reality that is shown. There's no meaningful difference between P and not P. So there are a lot of pitfalls of how to interpret logic into reality that computationally destroys the possibility of seeing the logical structure of the world. Because if there is one true fact about the world, then there is an infinite amount of related facts that are also true. Wittgenstein presents this logical framework such that this doesn't happen because they're just notations. At the end of the day, you're just looking at a picture of reality that is either true or false, and the negations and the manipulation that you can do with all the logical operators are directly implied. And he makes it clear that when the sense of the proposition is understood, all of the logical scaffolding of these propositions is also given. All the logical scaffolding of the propositions, which you can obtain through manipulating it, even when it relates to combining it with other propositions, all of that is included in the propositions. And so all of these concepts help to ground ourselves to recognize the logical structure without adding extra ingredients that ruin the picture and that would hide the logical picture of reality. And so this is very powerful in the reading of the Tractatus. And there is this link where Wittgenstein defines what is the limit of speech. The CTMU defines what is the limit of reality, of what can be perceived or conceived. So there's also a link which is much more restrictive in this document, and that is in some sense limited, that you get in a broader sense in the CTMU, where reality is a language, linguistic syntax, linguistic operators cover reality. And I think the limits of the Tractatus as a student of the CTMU are clear from the first proposition of the Tractatus, that seeds the error. The first proposition plants a seed that will lead into a partial understanding of reality and of language. And I'll read the first proposition. The world is all that is the case. And the first follow-up to that proposition clarifies as well what is meant. The world is the totality of facts, not of things. And in the CTMU, reality is modeled as the SCSPL, the self-configuring, self-processing language. And it can be described with 4 components: the objects, the relations or products, the productions, and the mu form. And by considering that the world is the totality of facts, Wittgenstein basically describes reality as the products. The products are the relations that exist into the world. And so in the Tractatus, there is no theory of the objects, of the processors. There is no subject, there is no God. The subject is outside the world. Proposition 5.632, the subject does not belong to the world. Rather, it is a limit of the world. Proposition 6.432, how things are in the world is a matter of complete indifference for what is higher. God does not reveal himself in the world. And so again, the processors that are formalized in the CTMU, where you have the GOD, the global operator descriptor, and you have the tellers, the agents that are also processing reality, the subject. This is modeled in the CTMU. It does not appear in the Tractatus because the Tractatus only says the world is the totality of facts. It's only the products. We only looking at the products of reality. We don't look at the processors. So then in the products of reality, Wittgenstein recognizes the logical structure that ties together the products of reality, but it mostly speaks about LO, the output, the physical output, what it can be described, what can be shown, and what can be retranscribed within propositions while preserving logic. But in the CTMU, there's also the pre-products, the telons. And these telons bring the will of the agents of the GOD within the world, within reality. In the Tractatus, this possibility is excluded. Proposition 6.373, the world is independent of my will. We also find in the world, everything is as it is and everything happens as it does happen. In it, no value exists. And if it did exist, it would have no value. And so the value of the world that is reflected in these pre-products that orient the world through the optimization of the generalized utility of the tellers and of the global operator disappears from the theory of reality. And so Wittgenstein focuses on the products of the world, the facts of the world, but he misses the pre-products because he doesn't conceive of the processors and also of the structure of the laws. So he misses the objects, the active reflexive object. He also misses the productions. The physical productions, he talks about them as providing a description of the world. Proposition 6.342, the possibility of describing the world by means of Newtonian mechanics tells us nothing about the world. But what does tell us something about it is the precise way in which it is possible to describe it by these means. So again, it's about providing a precise structure to describe the fact. That's what Wittgenstein retains about the physical laws. And he recognizes the issue of induction. Proposition 6.36311, it is an hypothesis that the sun will rise tomorrow. And this means that we do not know whether it will rise. And so we arrive at this very descriptive idea of the world where the laws of physics give us a way to describe the facts of the world, but we don't know if they apply. The law of causality is an hypothesis. And in the CTMU, you have an understanding of productions with these distributed Markovian laws, this N, spatio-temporally distributed Markovian rules, these laws of physics that are determined in the primary stage of telic recursion. And you also have these local, mutable, discrete laws that are added through the evolution of the universe, through the agents, through the tellers, and that provide this terminal determination of the laws of the universe through the agentic augmentation, let's say, through the addition of the causal contribution of the agents, of the tellers in reality. And so we have a much stronger understanding of productions where the laws of physics are understood as something that is directed toward the telic principle, so toward an objective that is understood within reality. It's not outside of reality. And these productions give a ground to the physical laws as well as a ground for the determination of higher level causality through these laws that provide a network of meaning that also have, through this extended superposition principle, meaning that can be of a higher order, that are not restricted to the local perspective, but that take into account spatio-temporally extended causal contributions for the evolution of the events and for the determination of the productions. And finally, you have the mu form, which is an explanation of the origin of reality through this direction of this unbound telesis, through this intrinsic asymmetry that provide the general form for coherent evolution from unbound telesis, from unlimited potential, that explains reality, that explains the content, that explains why there are forms, that explain why there are facts about the world that is not included in Wittgenstein. And so the Tractatus is very good at describing how language relates to the facts, to the products in LO, but because it focuses on that only, it misses all the structure that comes from the objects, the processors, the productions. And so there is unnecessary skepticism about the laws of physics. There is a reduction of the scope of reality and what language describes. We exclude the subject, we exclude the GOD, the global operator, from the theory of reality. And this creates a partial understanding of how language applies to reality that needs to be complemented with the broader theory of the CTMU. Also, when Wittgenstein suggests that in the world of facts, tautologies are meaningless, meaning in order to describe something that is shown by reality, a situation that is shown by reality, a tautology is meaningless. Proposition 4.461. For example, I know nothing about the weather when I know that it is either raining or not raining. And so to describe what is shown empirically into the world, Wittgenstein is right that tautologies are meaningless. But I would argue that if you know that it is either raining or not raining, there is a knowledge. The fact that rain is a possibility for the weather. So there's an internal structure there. And when you think about the laws, about how reality is generated, how it is structured, and by who it is generated, then you can find meaning in tautologies. And so when you have a tautological structure that covers the structure of the objects, of the production, of the product, it is not about identifying something and saying nothing about the situation. It's about revealing a structure that is valid all the time because it's a tautology. And so the intrinsic structure that is carried within the tautology, just as the tautological aspect of logical propositions, this says something about the world. So the tautology, the structure of the tautology itself says something about the world, not when you look at the world in terms of facts that are shown through perception, but when you think of the world as it supports its own origin, explanation, generation, laws. So when you couple the syntax to the instance in a more holistic way, you get the CTMU where tautologies extend beyond the naive tautology of describing a situation that is either the case or not the case, but that preserves a structure of intelligibility, that preserves the tautologies of logic themselves, that conserve this possibility of having reality as it is shown. And in this supertautology, you don't have anything of what is the case in the terms of what is a situation that I observe as a fact in LO, but you have everything about what is the case in terms of what structure of objects, of production, of processors, of origin, what is the structure of that allows me to perceive what is the case here. The tautology does not inform about anything that Wittgenstein takes as his limited scope of study, but it tells everything about the broader scope of reality. And the fact that Wittgenstein misses that yields an understanding that is typical of Descartes, Kant, the subjectivism proposition 5.63, I am my world. It makes an understanding of a world that cannot be explained as its laws, that cannot be explained as its reasons. It yields a philosophy that is stuck in radical subjectivism. The subject is all that there is, and as far as we are concerned, everything is generated for the subject, by the subject. It could be the case, we just don't know. But these are the typical conclusion. I am my world, I cannot know anything beyond my perceptions. I cannot tell anything. Maybe the laws of physics don't exist. Everything has to be regulated by my own way of knowing the world, which is very limited, because what is shown to me is sort of limited. And so there's no philosophical structure that gives a little bit more credit to the world, to this ability to generate, to maintain laws, to involve the will into the world, not make the will independent of the world. And so Wittgenstein in that way has this pitfall of radical subjectivism that leaves much of the structure of reality unspoken of. And this is what the CTMU talks about, the structure of the processors, of the objects, of the productions, of the origin of reality. So it's a much broader philosophy, much broader theory, and the use of the supertautology has meaning because it is not meant to describe something that happens to the subject, something contingent that happens to the subject, but it describes the structure of reality overall, as far as it also maintains the structure of logic. And so the book of Wittgenstein, as far as it understands the logical structure of the world of facts, is a great reading for the CTMU, but it has to be qualified as this investigation with limited scope that has pitfalls associated to this limited scope, in the sense that the author tried to create this full picture of reality, assuming that the limited scope was the full scope. And so there's no subject, there's no value, there's no will, there's only this description of facts, which sort of come as an external movie to the subject, which is this radical subjectivism that we must reject and replace with logical, supertautological understanding of the world that give a place to the objects, to the processors of reality, as well as the facts of reality. The subjects, but also the other subject, and also the global operator, and also that provides the means to find the values and to ground the values and the origin of reality as far as it generates reality. Conceiving the spectator, but the screen, all the other spectators, the movie is being projected, and so all the relations of the CTMU need to be added to this very valuable work, especially in terms of clarity, because the structure of propositions really provides great quality and great value to this Tractatus and gives a lot of insight of how the sign, the logical sign of the world can describe the fact of the world.